Why did Jesus have fewer disciples at the end of his ministry than he did at the beginning? Well, I want to come back to this question after a short discussion on discipleship. Frequently we hear the question, well, what is discipleship? And I think it's kind of like asking an athlete what it means to win. If you ask a baseball player what it means to win, they're going to say, well, we need to score more runs than our opponent. If you ask a soccer player, what does it mean to win? They're going to say, well, I need to score more goals than the other team does. And so discipleship means simply following Jesus. But when we ask the question, what is discipleship? I think we're getting more at, well, how do we do that, right? As an athlete would get into, well, how do we win? What's the best strategy? How do we do this? How can we be better at winning? Well, I think that's the question we're often getting at when we talk about what is discipleship. When it comes to the word discipleship, it's not in the Bible. I think one of the reasons why it has become more popular in the English language is due to Dietrich Bonhoeffer's book, The Cost of Discipleship, right? And so if we use what we already said, that discipleship is following Jesus, Dietrich Bonhoeffer's book is about the cost of following Jesus, and that's why he uses the Sermon on the Mount in a good portion of his book to talk about how costly it is to follow Jesus. And so I want to offer three categories very briefly here as to how I believe Jesus has taught us to disciple others and how we can grow as disciples as well. The first category is learning or teaching. If we are disciples, we are at our core learners. We're learning more about what it means to follow Jesus. We're learning more about how to be faithful and devoted to Jesus Christ. And so as we are commissioned to go and make disciples, we are involved in teaching them. That may look like the sermon on a Sunday morning, typically. That may come in the form of Sunday school for adults or Bible studies throughout the week. It's definitely part of youth group and studying the Bible together as youth. It could be Sunday school for children. And it can include and should include one-on-one relationships as well, where we're studying Scripture and talking about what a certain passage might mean as we grow. So learning and teaching is a major category of discipleship. Another category that I think sometimes gets overlooked is that of relationships and friendships. We see Jesus spending so much time with his disciples, whether it's fishing or eating with them, sharing a meal, traveling with them, talking with them. There are so many ways in which Jesus is present with his disciples. And so also, the church is to be present with each other. And in that presence, Jesus says, well, I will be with you where two or three are gathered, right? And so friendship and close relationships are such a major part of discipleship. We cannot be disciples alone. It's very difficult to find a reference in the Gospels to one disciple. They're always together. Third of all, the spiritual disciplines. Jesus teaches about when you pray, when you fast. He doesn't say if you fast. He doesn't say if you pray. And he's clearly talking about some of the spiritual disciplines, which also include reading Scripture, studying Scripture, memorizing Scripture, and there are other disciplines as well. Basically, what a spiritual discipline is helping us get to a point that we are not presently able to get to. It's kind of like, again, going to sports. If I want to run a marathon, I'm not going to be able to run that marathon tomorrow. I need to be able to train. I need to be able to discipline myself to be able to eventually run a marathon. And the same is true for the spiritual disciplines. They strengthen us. They help us get to the point that we want to go as we grow as disciples of Jesus Christ. And so I believe if we are strong in all three of these areas, teaching and learning, relationships and friendships, and the spiritual disciplines, if we're strong in each of these areas, we are going to be growing as disciples of Jesus Christ together. Let's get back to that question that I asked at the beginning. Why do you think Jesus had fewer disciples at the end of his ministry than he did at the beginning? Well, I think the answer to that, at least in part, is that he just didn't care about numbers. And this may be a little bit surprising. I think that we often view discipleship as a tool to help our church grow. But I don't believe that that's the way that Jesus saw it. I believe he saw the church as a tool or as a place for where disciples are being made. And so the number 11 that we see at the end of Matthew is very imperfect. It's not the 12 that he originally called. It's not, the 12 that refers back to the Old Testament and the 12 tribes of Israel. It's fewer, and it shows the imperfection of the group that was standing before Jesus. But yet, Jesus still commissioned his disciples to go and make other disciples. The church is constantly commissioned by Jesus, as imperfect as it is. I'm not saying we should emphasize our imperfection in order to give us an excuse to stay in that state. What I am saying is that in our imperfection, we ought to always draw close to Jesus Christ and rely on him, rely on his authority as we go and make other disciples, and be thankful for his presence with us, knowing that he will be with us. He will continue to teach his church. He will continue to be the Lord of his church and the head of his church as we go and make disciples of Jesus Christ.